Welcome to another edition of Travelstart's FAQ Friday with me, Nick Paul. Last week we got asked a question by Dave Roberts about why flights into Africa were so expensive. So there's a number of factors. It's quite a prickly issue, and I'm going to try and break it down, hopefully not offend too many governments around Africa. But let's look at some of the factors involved here. The first factor is demand. That's probably one of the biggest factors. Africa has 12% of the world's population, but only 1% of the world's air traffic. So, of course, the kind of demands on airlines are a lot lower in terms of passenger numbers, which for airlines is not a good thing. This is evident with a number of routes. For example, like Cape Town to Windhoek and Cape Town to Maputo recently being cancelled by certain airlines. So obviously that route wasn't in demand enough, and profits weren't high enough, so the route had to be cancelled. Low demand also drives up prices quite a lot. So what that means is the airlines will operate smaller aircraft on that route because it costs them less to operate a smaller aircraft for a smaller number of passengers. But in the end, when you divide that cost up amongst the passengers end up paying more. This is often why you see that, the routes like Cape Town to Kimberley or Cape Town to George or something like that costing a fair amount of money. It's because it's a small aircraft being operated, and so the cost to operate that aircraft, while it's lower for the airline when divided amongst a smaller number of people, is higher for the individual. Infrastructure in Africa is also pretty poor on the most part. There's very few good roads, very few good railways, so flying is the only option. However, obviously getting the fuel and parts for aircraft to various parts of Africa is often very difficult and very expensive as well. So this obviously drives up operating costs for airlines. A lot of airlines within Africa don't have a lot of money to start off with when they launch, and they use old aircraft that are often third, fourth-hand aircraft. Those planes are not particularly fuel efficient because they're old technology, and with the fuel prices going up, it means it's very difficult for airlines to operate those aircraft effectively and make a profit. So the prices then go up for those flights as well. This often means that airlines within the Middle East and EU can dominate within Africa. You often see Emirates flights into all sorts of parts of Africa, and you can actually fly via Dubai to get to parts of West Africa where Emirates flies. The same applies to Air France. Often it's cheaper to fly on Air France to parts of West Africa than it is on African airlines. And this is because Air France flies to these airports, but a lot of the African airlines don't. And also with the sheer economies of scale here, with Air France making a lot of profit on other routes, it doesn't really matter if they don't make as much profit or even a small loss on the routes within Africa. So they can use their economies of scale to dominate the airline industry here. Another big factor is bad politics. Many governments don't have bilateral agreements with their neighbors, and you'll notice that even within parts of Africa, the national carriers or the largest airline in the country don't even fly to all the neighbors around them. And also, finances are often a real issue. If you look at national carriers, and often national carriers are the only airlines who can afford to make a loss in this sort of situation. You look at Kenya Airways and SAA, who've both recently lost around $100 million. That's a lot of money, and really only governments can afford to lose that kind of money and still keep a company going. You'll look at the private airlines go bust left, right and center, but often even state airlines can't handle this sort of pressure. Recently we've had Tanzania, in Malawi, in Nigeria and Ghana international airlines all going bust. National carriers, big carriers with a big stake in them by governments, but they couldn't afford to keep them going. And finally, I think the most prickly issue would probably be corruption. Africa is known to have a high level of corruption in certain countries, not all countries, of course. And so what you start to see is state or single private airlines dominate the airline industry within each country and have a monopoly on certain routes. You just have a look at what One Time said a few years ago, just before they went bust. They were operating flights between Johannesburg and Maputo and complaining that it was impossible to be profitable on those routes because the government in Mozambique was refusing to give them allocation for more seats on flights there, and also they weren't getting good landing slots, and those good landing slots would have meant they could serve the business markets within, between South Africa and Mozambique. And at the end of the day, they had to pull out of that route, and they were claiming that pretty much the good landing slots were only given to the national carriers LAMA, Mozambique and SAA. And this sort of pattern is repeated all across Africa, where you have one airline dominating, or two national carriers dominating a route. And it makes it very difficult for smaller private airlines to compete with that, because you're literally competing with an entire country's tax base as opposed to your own private fare base. So I hope that has gone some way to answering Dave's question. If you guys have got any other questions, please ask them in comments below. Who knows, next time we may make it into a video. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks.